So there's obviously more than one way when it comes to dieting, and it's very individualized for each person. Not one size will fit all, which is again why it's important not to step out outside your scope of practice and prescribe a one size fits all solution to all problems. So first and foremost, we want to start off with looking at the fat loss pyramid and how fat loss occurs and the orders of priority in which it should come in. And at the bottom there, you've got energy balance. So as we discussed last week on the energy balance lecture, which was talking all about calories in, calories out. So if you're in a positive energy balance, i.e. you're consuming more calories than your body needs, then over time, you'll start accumulating and storing body fat. And if we're in a negative energy balance, over time, what we'll then start to see is we'll start to see fat loss taking place. And that is the only way it works with calories in and calories out, because calories are what our body governs as the currency and what we use for energy, etc. So once we've got that nailed, we can then start looking a bit more deeper into it, our macronutrient breakdown. Again, we discussed protein in quite length last week. But also when it comes to your carbohydrates and your fats. Now, when people traditionally start tracking, whether you're using a calorie counting app or anything like that, this really highlights and where people get a lot of stress around, because they're like, I'm struggling to hit my carbs, I'm struggling to hit my fats and balance it all out whilst hitting protein and staying within your calorie target. Quite simply, you don't need to focus on your carbs or your fats. And the reason for this is because it's completely individualized. Some people will be more satiated and happy on a higher carbohydrate diet, and some people, vice versa, for a high fat diet. And if we was to prescribe that, you're kind of doing someone a disservice, because over time, if they are using like MyFitnessPal, they can look back and see the trends in their diary of what they prefer most. So if you just focus on your protein and staying within your calorie range, they will naturally sort themselves out over time. And if you want to go in and have a look at what your body prefers more, or what you notice you're more satiated around, then do so. And that'll indicate if you like high carbs or high fat. Once we've nailed that, we want to look at your micronutrients. So this is going to be your vitamins, your minerals, where we're getting our fruit, our veg, and also, are we going to need to make up through that through particular times of the year? Like now, vitamin D, the sun is very few and far between. So where are we going to get that from? Supplementation, etc. Once we've sorted that, we then want to look at your meal timing. And again, this is really important, and it's kind of debatable whether this is going to be at the top or sort of in the middle of this pyramid. And the reason we want to get this right is because once we've got all those foundations in place, we then want to make sure we can train our hunger. So again, so that we're focused and we can turn our hunger on and off at the appropriate times, so we can get on with our daily business as opposed to being preoccupied with food all the time. And then at the very top of the tree, that sort of 2 to 3% edge, or making up for any sort of vitamin deficiencies that we have for sort of seasonal changes, looking at our supplements. And then and only then, once you've got all of these blocks in place, from our energy balance, making sure if we want to lose body fat, we're in a negative energy balance, our macronutrients, protein, micronutrients, meal timings, all squared, we can then potentially look to supplement in various areas that we may be deficient in. So that is the order of priority and what we want to nail before we look at doing any form of diet. Now, the first model that we've got is your traditional one. So your calories in model. So this is going to be using your MyFitnessPal, NutriCheck, and sticking to a calorie target, which is going to be the same Monday through to Sunday. So your typical prescription of 2,000 calories working to your protein targets. And again, as you can see, over the course of the week, it all equals 14,000 calories. So now let's just presume this is you to lose body fat, 2,000 calories daily, 14,000 calories in a week. You would then be losing body fat off the back of this. Again, dependent on the person. But that's the one model that we use. And this is probably the most used one and the most popular one out there of all of them, if I'm being honest. And it can also be viewed as in a negative way as well. A lot of people view using calorie counting apps or tracking calories as diet culture. They view it as negative and a real there's a lot of people that are very anti tracking calories. But if you reframe it and look at it another way, it's all about how you your behaviors around that. So if you are very stuck on the numbers, like I was saying earlier, you're trying to get your protein bang on, your calories bang on, your carbs, your fats, that behavior itself is going to be very detrimental to your relationship with food and how you view this. And you'll have a negative outcome from that. Whereas if you see it as a means to an end, it's a short stint, it gets you from A to B. And also, if you look at the educational aspect around it and really immerse yourself in it without getting too caught up in the numbers, then you're going to have a far better experience. And also, if you aren't using it as a way where you're reading food packets all the time and looking at every single gram and molecule that passes your mouth, yes, it is going to be important, but not to the point where you're stressing about where every single gram of food is going to be coming from. Because again, that negative behavior is going to have that outcome that's going to lead to that potential disordered eating, that stress, that anxiety around food that we want to avoid. We want to have that relationship with food where we are happy, we have that nutritional freedom. So it's all about how you frame and look at this as a model sort of moving forward. The next one that we've got is calorie banking. Now, this can be very popular and very useful if it's done in a strategic way of if you have a big event coming up and your goal is fat loss and you want to be able to have a bit more freedom at the weekend and still stay within your goals, then you can reduce your calorie allowance from Monday to Friday by, let's say, 300, 400, 500 calories, depending each day. You can then bank it up and then you can have more freedom and calories at the weekend. And again, as you can see, it still equals 14,000 calories. So you're still having an overall same amount. So you're still in a deficit as you were if you're doing traditional calorie counting. However, you've just distributed a little bit more. So you're more favorable of a weekend. So it doesn't trip you up and then you go over your calories. So again, this can be very useful if it's done in the right way. And I'm going to show you the two different ways in a moment that most people can sort of trip themselves up or they can plan it correctly. The next one is going to be fasting. And specifically, this one's going to be the 5-2 diet that I'm sure most of you may have heard of. And quite simply, this is on 2 days of the week, you'll be on low calories. So let's say 600 calories or 1200 calories, for example, depending on the deficit and the person. And then for the rest of the week, you can then essentially refeed and eat at a higher calorie. And the reason for this is simply you're just restricting the amount of food that you're consuming. And this, again, isn't a one size fits all. Most people, if they try and do this, they will then find themselves overeating in other areas. So again, only if it suits you. And it is very safe to go to 600 calories on a day if it's controlled and you know that your cravings, your hunger isn't going to take over you. But again, it's just a method to creating a deficit. And as you can see, you've still got the same amount of calories at the end of the week. So it isn't anything special or anything like that. There's nothing special that happens inside the body. It's just if you are living like that and you prefer that, then this would be a method that worked well for you. Personally, fasting doesn't work well with me. I absolutely love breakfast. If I don't have breakfast, I'm just absolutely no good to nobody. And I get pretty hangry pretty quick. So fasting is never on the cards for myself. A few members that we've worked through in the past, it's worked quite well for them. But again, it's what works for you. Now, this is what I was talking about with the calorie banking and the two different ways that you can do it. Now, obviously, these here, they're completely identical. But one of them's being taking a proactive approach and the other's being reactive. And when you look at someone's MyFitnessPal or if they're sort of filling in any food diary, they'll look exactly the same, but the two different behaviors around them are so different. So on the left, you've got someone that's proactive. So they've gone, right, I've got an event at the weekend. I am going to actively start banking calories Monday to Friday to allow for this at the weekend. And then on the right-hand side, you've got someone that just tries to over-restrict Monday to Friday. And then the weekends, because they've restricted so much, they feel the need to go out and overeat constantly. And it's that, I don't like to use the word binge and restrict cycle because binging is completely different to overeating, but it's that overeating cycle that people end up getting into. They restrict Monday to Friday. The weekend comes, they feel because they've been good Monday to Friday, or they've restricted too much, their cravings are too high, or they feel the need to reward themselves. Therefore, they just go mad on the weekend. And it probably wouldn't be 4,000 calories on a Saturday and a Sunday. It could be in excess of that when you take into account alcohol, takeaways, Sunday dinners, chocolates, all that sort of stuff. And sort of processed food is very low in volume and it's very high in calorie. So it can be so easy to go into the 5,000, 6,000 calories without even thinking about it, and definitely without even feeling full because there's next to no volume in it, and it's got next to no protein, so you're not going to be very satiated. So even though they look identical, they are completely different. Proactive and being reactive with it. And obviously, if you are finding yourself in that reactive state where Monday to Friday, you are living like a saint, and then the weekends you go overboard, it is most probably because you're over restricting, or you feel the need to reward yourself because you aren't living a sustainable life when it comes to fat loss. The next one's going to be hand portions. And again, this is a more holistic approach. It can be quite slow, bit of back and forth, making sure we get the portion control correct. But it works very, very well. We've got members inside the community at the moment that have had absolutely, and are still having amazing success with this. So again, this is a more holistic approach. Can be very slow, or if you get it bang on straight away and you're not afraid to make short, sharp changes, you can have fast success with this. But again, it just takes that stress and overwhelm out of having to weigh everything out. So it's a really, really good method to use. And then this is an interesting one here. I've done it in the past with a few members, and it's phasic dieting. Now, this is a study that was done where there was 2 groups, and the first group, they were doing continuous dieting for 16 weeks. So they didn't have any break whatsoever. It was just a straight run through, no diet break for 16 weeks. And as you can see along here, there was on average around about between 10 and 12, so 11 kilograms of fat loss that was achieved. Whereas when you look at the second group that was done, which was the phasic dieting group, so the phasic dieting group was 2 weeks of dieting and 2 weeks of moving up to a maintenance. So they have 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off essentially, but it was extended for 30 weeks because obviously the dieting phase is still going to be the same, but you need to take into account that sort of maintenance. And the success was great. They ended up with around about 16 to 15 kilograms fat loss. But what was really important is it's that sort of how many people relapse after this. And when they followed up after 6 months, the weight regain at the 6-month follow-up was still lower. It was still down there, which was great. And that's obviously going to be classed as a success when it comes to long-term dieting, because you can lose body fat very fast, which is great. But what's really impressive is, can you maintain that at 6, 12 months after and beyond? That's where that success lies. Because if not, then there needs to be more work done to ensure that you can do this for the rest of your life and sustain that healthy body. So again, that's another method that we've got there for that phasic dieting. But again, it doesn't work for everybody. It wouldn't work for myself because life and it's all over the place, and planning, you have to be quite meticulous with your planning, have a fairly sort of rigid set in stone work rota, so it could work quite well. And then lastly, and this is one of the main reasons I wanted to do this today, is intermittent fasting. You'll see all over the internet, social media, the Dr. Jason Fung, who was on Stephen Bartlett's podcast, saying that calories in versus calories out is complete nonsense, and intermittent fasting is the only way that you can lose body fat. But it's kind of silly, really, because the only way intermittent fasting works is through lowering your calorie intake. Therefore, calories in and calories out still is the base level of it. So it doesn't actually make any sense. And a lot of people that make these claims, I don't know why they do it, because they're very intelligent. And the only way I can think of is because they've got a financial incentive at the end of it. And if you was to follow this a little bit more, you'd probably see that he's releasing a book, he's releasing an app. Same as Tim Spector released the Zoe app, again, making ludicrous claims about calories in, calories out, with obviously clearly no evidence to support this. But then off the back end of that, he's got a financial gain because he's launching this app, which is based all around your blood glucose response, etc., which gets people bought into it. But that's sort of for another time. But intermittent fasting, again, it's just time restricted feeding. And you can still overeat on this, because if you aren't mindful of the food you're eating, if you're eating, you know what I mean, a lot of processed food in that 8 hours, you can easily go over your daily calories. Simple. It's just a way to control it a little bit more. And if you are going to use this type of method for your dieting, it needs to suit you. If you are a breakfast person, I wouldn't recommend using this, because 9 times out of 10, if that is the case, you're going to get hungry mid-morning. You're then going to wait until 1 o'clock, where at that point, You may be in an environment at work where someone brings a cake in, you are absolutely starving. It doesn't matter what your willpower is. Your drive will just be, right, I'm going to eat that cake, and you won't stop eating. You can easily overeat. And that's why intermittent fasting can trip a lot of people up. But if you don't eat breakfast and your first meal is around 1 o'clock, you technically intermittent fast anyway. You just haven't labeled it as intermittent fasting. But as I say, you can still easily overeat whilst you're intermittent fasting. There is nothing secret about this. And all diets share the exact same thing, whether that's juice diets, whether that's Slimming World, Weight Watchers, all of these things that, as we know, are detrimental to our relationship with food, body image, scales. They all have one thing in common, and that is they all create a calorie deficit in various different ways. And that's what a lot of people don't seem to grasp. They seem to think that this is the next magic thing when it isn't. It's just they're all creating a deficit. It's just what works for you, which is why we have these various different methods. Some are more useful than others, but they all create a deficit overall. And that is all that they are. So belt fed those